Welcome to A Way Forward, the podcast where I sit down and have real discussions about the challenges we face in our cities, communities, and neighborhoods. The goal of this podcast is to create a space that includes expert interviews, guests with lived experiences, and voices not often heard. I'm your host, retired Police Chief Daniel Hahn, and I will bring my experience in law enforcement, community, and education to each conversation so that together we can build a way forward. All right, I would like to welcome Roshaun Davis to A Way Forward. Roshaun, as you know all too well, every major city across our country, including our city, Sacramento, continues and has been in this challenge for a really long time where we have neighborhoods that are economically challenged, high crime, poverty, education is an issue in many of these neighborhoods. We're literally leaving people behind. You find in a lot of these neighborhoods, at least I've found, that there's a lot of kids that don't have hope. So you ask them what they want to be involved in, what they want to do when they get older, and they don't see themselves in either getting older or they don't see themselves in certain positions. And I find that a shame because I grew up in one of those neighborhoods, but I had a mom that made me believe I could do anything I put my mind to as long as I worked hard at it. But when I think back at some of my friends, they didn't have that person. They didn't have that family structure supporting that. So that is some of the stuff that I want to talk to you about today because of the work that you do. And I think the innovative and successful work that you do. So why don't we start with, well, actually, before we get to that, I want just people to know, because I know you won't say some of this stuff. Roshaun is the founder of Unseen Heroes. He is the executive director of culture. He has been awarded top 25 change makers in Sacramento. He has been awarded Sacramento's top 100 people, and he also received the 40 Under 40 award. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to get much more.
And a TED Talk, too.
And a TED. Yeah. You know, I didn't even know you had that till the other day. I just saw it. So awesome. So why don't we touch real quick on what is it that you do?
What is it I do? Okay. So I do a lot. But I think if I was to drop anybody into like what I do on a daily basis, is use my creativity to solve problems. And that can go anywhere from neighborhoods to business to real estate development to trying to solve the world's problems to being creative and being an artist. Like, it's all kind of bottled in this, what I like to say is creativity.
Okay. So I want to jump much more into that on some of the specific things you do and some of the successes you've seen and also some of the challenges you see in communities and cities in improving lives and getting better as a city. But before we get there, I would love for you to talk a little bit about your upbringing, where you grew up, and what experiences, people, things influenced you to get you where you're at today and having the heart that you have for the community today.
Yeah, that's a long, I'm about to turn 43, right? And so it's a long...
That means you're no longer young,
you know
by
what
the
I mean?
way.
Yes, I know. I'm feeling it. But I think just starting off, I think my positionality and how I come into this space is from a lot of different angles. I am the son of teenage parents. So mom and dad had me when they were in high school at Hiram Johnson.
Your parents went to Hiram Johnson?
Yep, they went to Hiram Johnson.
I'll forgive them for that.
Yeah.
They could have gone to Sac High, I guess.
You know what I mean? And so, both of them seniors in high school, have a kid. So that kind of shapes who I am. Dad was into a lot of crazy things. So that kind of shapes some of like my neighborhood upbringing. So spent a lot of time in Oak Park in the 80s.
Okay.
If you know what I mean.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
I was there myself in the 80s.
Yeah. And so I think that shapes a lot of who I am and, what I bring to the table. Kind of got himself together, went to the Army. So then Army then becomes a part of like my journey. Started living in different places. So I lived in Kansas. I lived in Germany. Did a short stint in
And your mom and dad
Georgia.
were together?
They were together during that
Which is
time.
unusual all by itself, being teenage parents.
Literally.
Yeah.
But during the time of like Germany, mom, moved back. They got a divorce. And I should say, being honest in my experience, there was a lot of domestic violence too, on both sides, because my mom is no punk. So, so I don't know who's in the worst position in that state, but that kind of painted me too, because I would see my parents fighting, right? So then mom leaves and goes to California while I'm in Germany. So I think there's that piece that's there too. So you have a mom that leaves a kid. So there's some of this abandonment, but also seeing the world. Like, I'm in Germany when this happens. So then growing up a little bit with my father, and then coming to Sacramento back with my mom. She got custody. And I came here in 6th grade, I believe. So that was like the first 5 years, or 5 years of elementary school was all that. So really got some of my more roots when I was in 6th, 7th grade. And I've been here ever since. Went to Einstein, middle school, went to Hiram Johnson, graduated from Hiram Johnson. And, mom really kind of instilled in me, like, you can do whatever you want to do, kind of in that same way. But she told me I didn't have to go to college. She's like, you have to make that decision on your own. But when you tell an 18-year-old that, like,
Right.
I had the pass. I was
Right.
like, yo, my mom told me I didn't have to go to college. I didn't even got to apply for nothing.
My mom didn't tell me that.
When, in retrospect, I'm like, Mom, why did you tell me that?
Right.
And she's like, because I knew you would make the right choice, And
Right.
so I got
Then it's
out,
your choice
then
instead
it's
of being
my
forced
choice.
to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that really shaped me too, because, I got out, graduated high school, and then probably about 2 years after high school, my baby's mom at the time, right? Like, or my girlfriend at the time, high school girlfriend, had her since 10th grade. We had been together. We both graduate, and then we have a baby, And so it wasn't until that baby came out of her and I looked at him for the first time and I was like, yo, like, I got to get my life together. Like, I wasn't going to school at the time. I was just, had like random jobs, but becoming a father really shapes who I am. Because I looked at him and I was like, yo, I can't tell you got to go to college if I didn't go
Right.
this way. I can't tell you to be this if, and I'm not shaping knuckleheads, right?
Right,
Like,
right.
I'm shaping educated people,
Right.
but I got to be one myself. So that's really when that shift in my life came in, and then started going to college, went to Sac City for a couple years, then went to Sac State. At Sac State, by that time, I had literally like worked and just did that thing, but also then just life. And I get life. I'm 21, 22.
Right.
Me and his mom didn't end up working out, right? So now I'm a single dad. She's a single mom. We have joint custody of this kid that we both love and are trying to like manage
Right.
while I'm going to school. Right about that time is when I just really fell into finding my voice too in hip hop. So a lot of people don't know, even with that list you just read, I was almost signed to Warner Brothers for being an MC.
As an artist.
As an artist, right? And so during that time, I just found a way to like voice how I feel through writing and through words. And that's always followed me. It's just like that's been one of those
And
things.
you graduated from Sac State, didn't you?
Yep, graduated from
And
Sac State.
what's your I'm curious what your degree is in based on what you do today.
You know what it is. Communications.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
All right.
So I graduated with communications with a journalism background.
But you at that time you're probably not thinking you'll be doing what you're doing now, right?
At all.
Which is pretty common.
Literally.
Like
literally. People tell
end
you
up
that,
in places that they never thought they would be.
But when you're going for something, you're like, nah, this is what I'm gonna do. This is what
Right.
I'm gonna do. And so, yeah, like I would have told you back then that I was gonna be an MC that's signed to a major label and touring across the world, And so that was my trajectory. But while I was out in the field out there and, doing shows across California, college tours, all of this stuff, while going to school, while having a kid, managing all of these different things, I found a hole in the market. And I was just like, wait, who is that person? And they're like, yo, like, that's their manager. Who's that person? Oh, that's their
So you
PR
saw all
person.
the different parts.
Yeah, and I was just like, oh, we don't have that here in Sacramento, which then brings in that next layer. It was just like, all right, so let's create that. So sat with my band and I was like, yo, from now on, if anybody asks us to do anything, send them to me. But I did a pseudonym called Sean Williams. And so that was our manager. So anytime anybody wanted to book us, we'd be like, yo, you got to holler at Sean. And that literally, literally on email, this is back in the day, right? So all we had was email. It was just, nope, they can't come out for less than this. And, that literally put us to the next level. And so I just saw that, like, when you take it professionally, like when you take it to that next level and get like the business side involved, like people respect you more, And so that was like, oh, okay, cool. So started that, and that's literally how we started Unseen Heroes. It started as like an artist representation company.
So what took you from, I guess, basically addressing your passions and making money, I would hope, at the same time, to still addressing your passions, but then now on a broader scale serving others? Because what you do now is helping lots of people, but what you just described was more of your own business, helping yourself, helping other bands and things, but it wasn't as broad as where you are now. What caused that expansion?
That expansion. Yeah, honestly, it was at the time really understanding how to unlock my time and my energy. So there was a couple bands that were just like, yo, can you do that for me? And I was like, nah, we can't. I'm trying to make it myself. Like, nah. Right. And kept calling me. And it just clicked one day. I was like, wait, if I get this person to pay me X amount, that takes away my student assistant job at the state, and that makes me sustainable. And then I have all this other time, which I can invest into growing this company. Why wouldn't I do that? And so right around the time I graduated is when Unseen Heroes started taking off. And it became one of those things where I would come across very creative people, very talented people, and I'd be like, why are you still at this lower level of like not even believing in yourself? So it goes back to like what you were saying. It's like, yo, you have a dope product right here. Like, why isn't it out in front of people? And they're like, I don't know, like, is it that good? And I'm like, yeah, I've been some places you could compete at a higher level, and that believability that they had for themselves wasn't there. And I think that's kind of when it started to take a shift where it was like, nah, like, let me show you and connect you to a group of people who would purchase your products. And so that's when we started doing like larger scale events, and we would do like markets, because we knew like, on one side, community loves places to gather, but then also they want to support or buy from local people.
I was going to say, instead of gathering in a different neighborhood.
Right, exactly, right? They want to. And so is again, like these creative thinking spaces is just like, wait, like if we take 1 and 1, doesn't that equal 2? Like, let's explore that.
So, I'm not going to put this on you. This is my opinion. I've lived in Sacramento my entire life, and I've been part of government since I was 19 years old when I went through the police academy.
Okay.
And as the higher up I went, the more you get behind the scenes looks in the closed session council meetings or the closed door whatever meetings. And I just always, growing up with mom who was very engaged in the community, I would basically say, I guess she was back then a community activist, if you will, and having, as much as I resisted it as a kid, having that just being around me every single day.
Yeah. Well.
I just found it interesting. I felt like a lot of people didn't understand the challenges of the neighborhoods that were the most challenged, and their solutions weren't, it ranged from either they had good intentions, but it just wasn't going to accomplish anything, or their intentions didn't have anything to do with the neighborhood. It had their own personal goals.
Yep.
Were their intentions. So I'm curious from your point of view of somebody that works a lot in Oak Park and helps people, and we'll get into this later, buy homes. And I see what you do as very different than what I've seen decision makers do.
100%.
And so what I see, again, from decision makers is more, I'll give you something, I'll hand you something that will last for a specific period of time, but then I'm gonna need something again.
Yep.
As opposed to being able to lift myself up with dignity and have self-esteem, because again, a lot of these kids growing up in neighborhoods, they don't have hope. And you know, with hope, you can accomplish a lot of things.
100%.
So I'm curious from your point of view, all the things that you've done and seen, what do you think are the biggest challenges of lifting up communities such as Oak Park? What have you seen as the biggest, 2 or 3 challenges that continue to bear down on communities like in Sacramento? That would be like the Oak Parks, the Del Paso Heights, the Meadow Views, that are not adequately being addressed or called attention to.
Called attention to. The more and more that I get deeper into the work, I think that it is the understanding, and this goes throughout the whole spectrum, because I look at it like a spectrum. It's like on one side you have someone that is existing in the neighborhood day by day, can only think through the next hour, trying to get through this job to pay the bills, all the way up to, or all the way to the other side, which is like government trying to come in with solutions to mitigate all of what's happening. The one thing that I see as a through line, like a golden thread through it all, is the understanding that this was by design. You know what I mean?
So understanding how we got there.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me because someone who's in the neighborhoods, like, they don't understand that this has literally been designed to be this way. And then folks that are, in their seats for a couple years or whatever, they've been just trying to do their job, and they're part of the design too, just at a different spectrum piece. But then we're looking at the solution. And so you get people who are experiencing a problem that are trying to solve and start a company or business or something to mitigate the problem without looking at the knowing of the entire problem,
or even caring to know.
Or even caring to know. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Or like, it doesn't get that deep.
And I'll continue to do it the rest of my life, but I've done a bunch of research and I teach implicit bias in history, and history is a big part of that. And I thought it was very interesting, and like these, the light bulbs going off in your head when I did the history of my own neighborhood.
Right.
And I was at first shocked that, like, how did I not know this history? Like, I grew up here, I went to school here. How come I was never taught the history? And I grew up always thinking Oak Park was always the way it was when I grew up, which I loved. I had a blast growing up in Oak Park. But there was no doubt it was high crime.
Yep.
There's no doubt that there was gangs. There was no doubt. I mean, I witnessed my first murder when I was 9 years old. The challenges were in front of you every day.
Every day.
If you lived there, you still knew the people there, so it was still a great place to grow up, in my opinion. But I always thought it was like that.
Yep.
I never knew it was different before. And so therefore, I always thought it was going to be like that.
Yep.
So it's always been this way. And when you go to communities, when I used to work in Del Paso Heights, people go, this is Del Paso Heights, this is the way it is.
Yep.
I'm like, but it doesn't
But
have to
it
be
doesn't
like
have to be, and it wasn't always that way.
So to your point, if we think that this neighborhood has always been that way, and it's largely because of the people that live there, that comes with one set of solutions.
Yep.
And it's very easy to go, part of that solution would be police department, and well, if that's just the way you are, then we just need to hold you accountable.
Yep.
Because you're just naturally like that.
Yep.
Versus, no, this was created this way, and this neighborhood wasn't always like this, and it was a thriving neighborhood, then that comes with a whole different set of solutions, which I think is really where you operate. So I'd love for you to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what you do through your other organization, CLTRE, where I know some of it is helping people buy homes, but like, what is the mission of your organization, and what are some of the things you do to help lift? And I would venture to say it's not just lifting the direct people that you help, it lifts our whole city. When more people are successful and are thriving and are happy, then that goes down to their kids, that goes down to their neighbors, and those sort of things.
Yeah, I think to talk about culture, you have to talk about Oak Park, right? And being in Oak Park, and then you have to talk about displacement, because before we were in Oak Park, we were in Del Paso. And so that's where we sang Unseen Heroes, first came out, and we started doing our own events. And what we found was when we produced an event, 3,000 people showed up. But it was this thing that folks had been following us for all these years because they saw the cool stuff that we did. And then when that became successful, then the building owner was like, hey, I want to do this on my own, and you guys got to go. Right around that time, I met Ron Verlakis, who is the developer over in the Oak Park area that owns a lot of buildings over there. Met him the next day and kind of saw his vision of like what he was thinking of.
Met him the next day?
Literally, is so funny. So he came to the event and he was like, yo, like, who did this? And I just happened to be standing at the door, and my friend was like, oh, actually him and his wife did. And he's like, I'd love to.
So one door closes,
literally,
another door opens.
Literally, like the building owner told us that maybe on a Friday when we had a conversation. That first Sunday, met Ron. That next day, I went and met with Ron and was just like, hey, like, let's see. And so ended up moving our business over there, still have the storefront. It'll be 10 years, Small Business Saturday. It'll be 10 years that we've been there. Lived upstairs for the first 6 before we bought our own house. And I say that to say is like seeing all the work that we put into on the Oak Park side and just like literally just pouring into. It's like when you have a place that you can call your own, like you want to pour into it, you know?
Absolutely.
And I think that kind of shapes who we are on the culture side. Is like we just poured our hearts in, you know? You gave us, you know, a good rent, you know, gave us a good rent on both, actually, like the business side and the family side. So it allowed for us to pour more in. So then we start events like Gather. And Gather Oak Park was, before the pandemic, 7 years strong.
And what is Gather?
So Gather, it was just I would have told you before the pandemic, a block party to get people to talk. Like that's literally what it was. So we shut down the street out there and we said, there's a problem here. There's actually a lot of problems, but here are the 2 that we're trying to solve. It was a food desert, so let's do a food event, right? And then also understanding the social economics of it, we sat with all the different folks that were a part of it that brought food and said, hey, you got to have something for the community here. Let's make it free and then make the food accessible. But the other part was a neighborhood that stays together is a neighborhood that eats together. And that was really like the behind the scenes of what we were testing. Is like when you put people together and you break bread, it's like inviting someone to your house, you know, and you get to learn. And so then we did a communal dining table down the middle of the street on purpose, because then once you grab your food,
you got to sit together.
You got to sit together. There's nowhere else to sit unless you want to sit somewhere else. And so it was all of these things that we did by design to get people to talk, because what we saw was there's people in the built environment, real estate developers, you know, real estate agents that were looking and speculating at all of this stuff that was happening. And then you had folks in the community that just had been there for years and years and years, and they weren't talking, right? And it was just like, wait, why don't you talk to so-and-so? Why don't you talk to so-and-so?
What was your underlying purpose from transitioning to those sort of things?
Yeah.
Like
the pandemic.
Not too many people go, hey, let's have the community on our street. And like, you don't see that very often.
I think, you know what? I think you do. I just don't think there's that much intentionality with it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I see now being in the space, like when we started events, there weren't a lot of like events, whether small, large scale, 2008 in Sacramento when we started, right? Whereas now, like you can throw a rock and there's like hundreds of events, but I think the intentionality is key. It's like, let's do this for a reason of uplifting this neighborhood, right? Which then gets into like culture. So did that until the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, you couldn't do events and you couldn't open a retail store. And so it was like, whoa, what do we do? Well, let's spend some time and just reflect, because we hadn't reflected since 2020 to the time we started in 2008. And what we found was just like there was reoccurring themes. We would start something and then get displaced. It was like, dang, why does that always happen? Then doing the research and seeing like, oh, this happens all the time. This happens before me and probably will continue to happen after me. Okay. And then it's like, oh, this happens in neighborhoods, right? It's like, oh, then you start following the trends of neighborhoods. And then that's when I started to see the cycle of a neighborhood. And it's like, oh, there is literally a cycle. Some take longer to go to that down, or some there's stipulations and rules and code put in so they don't.
A lot of those cycles leave a lot of people in the wake.
Exactly. And so then I started seeing that, and I was just like, oh, no, this is just cyclical, you know? It's just like, huh. So started studying that, and then started looking at the impact that we created. And so I was like, wait. Then I read the Race and Place study, and I'm forgetting his name, but found it on the Sacramento City website. And it's like the lens that Sacramento's using to look at like how they're informing decisions. And I read that, and that's when I found my experience in that, and was like, this was not by happenstance. This was literally by design that I experienced all the shifts and movements and ups and downs in my life. It just, everything made sense at that point. And I was like, how do we get ahead of this? Like, how do we look forward? Because we're so stuck in day to day that we don't see the past and we don't see the future. How do we pull back? And so started looking at the general plan of Sacramento, and then understanding like, oh, general plans exist in all of these different places. Let's see what they're envisioning for 2040. Okay, well, we're going to be in that conversation. So thus then culture starts. And so culture is, you know, our mission, we say, is to shift the cultural landscape in Sacramento by the year 2040, so that there's more folks at the table that are culturally relevant, as opposed to what's happening 40 years from now. And the interesting thing I always say is like, sometimes it is by intentionality to leave folks out, but sometimes it's just the lack of knowledge of knowing what door to step in to be in the room, when they'll be like, you know, I've been in so many meetings, they're like, oh, I'm so glad you're here. And it's like,
Now, as part of culture, I believe you have stepped into the world of helping people purchase homes.
Yep.
So I'm sure you don't provide the loan, right? You're not a bank.
Yep.
So how do you do that? And what got you started? I assume it's to address some of the things that you just spoke about. But how did you get started in that area? And like, what was your purpose? And what have you seen as the results from, like, for example, the families that have purchased a home? That's
my favorite part, is just telling about the families, because, you know, it literally is shifting the cultural landscape, right? So to backtrack, you know, we started with this idea probably in 2021 when we were shaping out culture. And I should share that culture is an acronym. It stands for Creating Leverage to Ready Entrepreneurs. So when you think about economic development and how to get ahead, it's two ways. It's business ownership and then real estate ownership. So on one side, creating leverage to ready entrepreneurs.
Two things that certain communities were on purpose not allowed to participate in.
Literally. So, you know what I'm saying? It all comes together.
Yes.
So that's on one side. So part of our programs are teaching locals how to own businesses. And then it stands for...
So are these classes?
Yep. So like, classes, programs, you know, a lot of in the BIPOC entrepreneur space, giving them the language of entrepreneurship, showing them like it is possible for you to own a business and talk about your pain points, talk about your target audience, talk about your minimum viable product, like all of the language pieces that keep us out of spaces, they learn. And then the real estate side, it also stands for, why am I blanking on it? It's creating leverage ready entrepreneurs. And then, community-led transformative real estate. So that's culture too. So looking at different ways to own real estate. And that's where the first-time home buyer program comes in is, all right, well, if we have locals here, and we don't want them to be displaced, then we need to have solutions for them to stay in these neighborhoods. And so, went to the city of Sacramento, and I remember that, like, seeing a gap in the ecosystem, and I was just like, let me talk to some folks in the city. And I was like, hey, I see this gap here in this whole entire ecosystem that's not being addressed. And that was with Megan Van Voorhis. Mm-hmm. She was like, Roshaun, I'll be right back. I'm going to set up another meeting. And the next meeting, it's like 32 people from all of the different.
And she's fairly new to her position too.
Right. Yeah. And so like on that next meeting, it was like 32 different people from all the different spots in the city. Mm-hmm. And I was like, She's like, share what you just shared. And I was just like, I just see gaps in the ecosystem that we should be connecting. And of that conversation, I then met Danielle Foster, who was the housing policy manager. And she's like, let's create a program that literally addresses this displacement.
And what do you think this process or your organization does that takes, say, a family that maybe a year ago was not thinking about buying a house or didn't think they could buy a house or whatever, was renting one way or the other, to now a family owns a house? What is that
process
piece or that process that took them from not owning a house to owning a house?
Yep.
Because I'm sure these families didn't instantly become a millionaire from something and then I can buy a house.
Now
right?
I can buy a house.
Their circumstances were probably still very similar, except now they own a house, whereas before they didn't.
Yeah. And so it was literally that conversation turned into our 6-week program. So we designed a 6-week program that teaches them literally the home buying process. And we say like knowledge replaces fear, right? And so it's literally giving them the tools and saying like, here's some language for you to use and talk to your realtor to ask these questions. This is going to be the process all the way to you walking in the door, and we teach them all of those different pieces. And we have a dope program director, Ashley Garner, that teaches that whole piece. Awesome. And it comes from...
So it's really just a knowledge and experience
literally
thing. And probably a belief that I can actually own a house.
Shifts the belief. So people come in on that first day and we talk about the fears, we talk about the pain points, like what is it? And, we get people who are like, I've been displaced in Oak Park. Like I've been displaced twice, not once, twice. I lived in a house. They said I had to move. I moved into another house renting. And then they said I had to move. Right. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, well, let us give you the language. Let's teach you the process. So you don't continue to go into these houses that you're renting. You actually focus and get through to the ownership piece. So we've had, one of our like standout client, or I'll just say standout people who've gone through the program, Angela Vega, she actually grew up in Oak Park, had her family was there, and when she tells her story, it's dope because she tells it with so much conviction. She like cries, and it's just like, that's what we're doing. We're shifting lives. But her thing is like, I always tell her story in this way because when she got the call that she got accepted to the program, we only had spots for 25 people. 367 people applied.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All from the Oak Park area or
all
citywide?
From the Oak Park area.
Okay.
Right. And so, well, it was citywide, but they had to be residents in that area for us to pick them. Right. And so when she got the call, she shares that before she got the call, she got another call from the owner of the liquor store, the gas station up there, right on the corner, telling her that her brothers were outside and they were drunk and she needed to come pick them up or he was going to call the cops, right? And she's just like, it was just another day in my life. And then I get this call that, congratulations, you got accepted to this program. And she's like, I just broke down in tears because I didn't think that that was available for me, right? And so through that program, she learns like all the language. So I think right now she's not in a home yet, but she has $7,000 saved up in a high yield savings
She probably
account.
wasn't saving before.
At all, literally.
Yeah.
Right. And she's like, but the thing is, at our graduation, so after the 6 weeks, we have a graduation. At the graduation, we had her speak and she brought her kids up to take pictures. And she's like, it's not even about me at this point. I'm teaching them about high yield savings accounts, home ownership, not owning one home, owning two homes. And she just like really had everybody in there like crying, like, oh my God. But that's what we're doing. And that then creates the pathway. And then folks are finding out like, okay, cool. Like I can own, you know? So like Doug and Vanessa are another group or couple that went through the program. They weren't even thinking of buying because they didn't think that it was for them. And they got through the process. They graduated in December. They just got the keys to their house 2 weeks ago, or no, about a month ago now. So it took them 7 months to go through the process and buy, and now they're homeowners.
Yeah, a big part of this is just changing people's mindset.
It's
making
perspective
them,
shifts.
showing them that you can access some of these things that build wealth, build generational wealth, build, change the mindset of your kids.
Yep, literally.
So these programs, you mentioned city and a county person, Danielle and Megan. So does the city or county help support the program, fund it or fund portions of it? Or I mean, is this something that government is actually helping a local entity help families?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. So the pilot program, so it's our first 25 people that went through the program, city funded with the community Aggie Square Community Benefits Agreement. Each person that goes through the program gets $15,000 down on their home, and then they get $2,500 in flex payments to either pay off debt or put to closing costs. So we've paid off about $70,000 worth of people's debt so far with this program.
Is it still a pilot program, or is it moved beyond?
No, it's moved beyond the pilot program. So now we're on our second cohort, which because of the funding from the city of Sacramento, we were able to bring U.S. Bank to the table, and U.S. Bank put up $500,000 for the next cohort to go through. So it's like continuing to grow this pot. So now we have $1 million in down payment assistance going to BIPOC individuals to buy homes in these neighborhoods that they're from. Literally, that they're from. It's not even outside people.
Moved out
and
watch their old neighborhood start to thrive more than.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I always when you're first in college, your first time, like I went to City College too, right out of high school, and a lot of the classes, the instructor would have everybody introduce themselves. What's your name? What's your degree? Where you from? That kind of thing. And I could just always remember whenever I would say I was from Oak Park, there'd be like a gasp in the class. How did you make it out? Would be a lot of the question. I'm like, what do you mean make it out? I still live there. I didn't make it. And it would strike me like their view of Oak Park is very different than mine. Like I love Oak Park. Like I wasn't blind. I saw what would go on, but like it didn't impact me the way it impacted people that don't live there and know the people. So, one of the last questions I have for you is what do you feel that people need to be thinking about? Now, people could be politicians, neighborhood folks, that we as a society, as a community need to do in regard, or the way we need to think and some of the actions we need to take to help lift up some of our communities, because the reality is that communities, whether it be Oak Park or Del Paso Heights, in some ways take up a lot of government money.
Yep.
Law enforcement services are more in those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That's the most expensive thing a city does.
Interesting.
Fire services, health, hospitals, all those things are greater in these communities. When emergencies like COVID hits, they're more predominant in those communities because the health was already not great. The health care services were not accessed the way they could be. So it's a drain on a city financially. And, to me, I just look at people without hope, like kids coming up should have, equal access.
Yeah.
And that's just not the reality in pretty much any city in our country. So what do you think people should be thinking about? Because this podcast is about a way forward. How is tomorrow better than today for all people?
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest things that people need to be thinking about? How do we help improve our communities so more and more people thrive? Not to mention, so we can compete on a global stage even better than we are now, because we're not fully utilizing all the resources at our disposal, meaning our people.
Yep. Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that's always been the basis of anything we've done, whether it's unseen, whether it's culture, is collaboration is key. Like that is truly what's going to get us to compete at a different level, to whether it's the neighborhood level or the city level or the state level, on nation level, like it has to be collaboration is key and different collaborators at the table. So like partly like what we do at Culture is we just set out the table and then literally it's like, what do you bring to the table? How do you come to the table? All right, pull up a chair and do that thing that you're good at and do it in unison for this thing. And so I love sitting in meetings where I don't even have to talk because we have somebody who is working on broadband nationally. We'll sit in a meeting with like a SMUD, and to see him talk their language is just amazing because it's like, oh, I don't know that, and I'm not going to act like I do know everything about electrification in the neighborhood and the digital divide and all of those things, but I know to bring someone to the table.
I know who does know. And they'll speak because they believe in this community development model. So let me ask you this, because this happens to so many people, and you've actually mentioned one already. On these collaborations, I know, like I say, you've mentioned one. Some of these collaborations have probably been very disappointing to you, meaning somebody walked away from the table when you didn't want them to, or somebody, you mentioned one in Del Paso Heights. But how do you handle that? How do you handle when you think you have this great thing going and this is going to be a great collaboration, and for whatever reason, it doesn't work because the other collaborators don't want it to work for whatever reason?
I think
how do you keep moving?
How do you keep moving?
That happens to everybody.
It does.
Some people it destroys. Like, then I guess this wasn't meant for me to be doing this sort of thing.
Yep. I think for me, it's understanding that it's part of the game and part of the nature of things, right? But it's also what we've been really priding ourselves on and really trying to focus on is not going wide, but going deep, right? And really centering around, like, are you with this or no? Because if you're not with this, then no. You can go do your thing, right? So I think it's about getting a lot clearer on what the intentionality of the partnership is and going beyond the vanity metrics of it, right? Because with vanity metrics, people they like to be around the wins,
right?
And like to celebrate and take the pictures and things like that. But can you really hold the space and get this place to heal? Because that's what's needed. You can't get to thrive if you don't heal first, right? And if you're not about the healing of this place first, then we're not for you.
So on that same note, what do you say to people? Because I've heard this a lot, both in my personal life and in my professional life. That you mentioned healing. Like, I think there's a lot of people that believe like we all have to heal from something, get over it, right? Like, this is the term. This is the land of milk and honey. In this country, everybody has an equal opportunity to thrive.
Yeah.
So therefore, those people that aren't thriving, those neighborhoods that aren't thriving, they're just lazy. They're just maybe predisposed to certain things. And so I had it hard when I was a kid too, and I still pulled myself up, and now I'm successful. You do the same thing. So I hear a lot of that still to this day,
Still to
and you
this
can
day,
see it
yeah.
in some of the national politics, some of the local politics. What do you what like if that persona was standing in front of you saying those things, what would your response be?
I think my response is a little different. I am very inquisitive. So I think like, why do you think that? Like, let's share more. Talk. Let's have a conversation about it. And I'm not trying to change your mind. If that's you, that's you. That's your experience. Got it. But that's not everybody's experience, right? And I think globally, or, you know, whether locally or globally, it's about pulling people to the middle. And I've heard you say that as well, is like, there's going to be the extreme people over here. There's going to be the extreme people over here. But how do we get people closer to the middle? It might not be in this lifetime that person standing in front of me even understands it. But it might be their kids that start to see it and start to open their eyes and say like, oh, okay, there isn't just my way of doing things and everybody else is wrong. It is, everybody has their own experience. So let everybody share their experience.
Interesting.
You know?
Because I think some people go to war.
Yeah, they literally go to war,
All
right?
sides, right? And I always just wonder, like, okay, what's that accomplish?
Yeah,
Like,
100%.
Now they're even more dug into their position.
100%. I've seen it happen with clients. We have clients that throw large, you know, like rallies, and then right across the street, there'll be the whole opposite side. And then they'll argue with bullhorns. And it's just like, wait, guys, like, what if all this is made up?
Right.
What are you arguing about at that point? Because
Right.
I can find someone who believes this, and I can find somebody who believes this.
Right.
So what are we doing? Okay, well, you guys stand over there. We're trying to get work
But I
done.
do find when people understand, like in the history classes that I facilitate, there's a lot of people that come up afterwards that I never knew.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And you can see like light bulbs going off, and you know, they don't literally do something right there. There's really nothing to do right at that second. But like, you can see like there's a difference when you understand that what you might have believed before is actually not how it occurred.
And,
you know, a lot of, even on the reparations kind of things, I think we make a mistake by only talking about slavery. There's a lot that happened after slavery that's very impactful to not just the black community. There's a lot of things that happened to a lot of groups of people long after that still have impact today of why
and
people don't have money.
Too.
Yeah. And will continue,
Even like I always think about that too. There's like before. So my positionality when I come into rooms where it's like, okay, financial institution, I need you to understand, not you sitting in that chair,
right?
but this thing that you're representing and you work for has literally created red lines. Not blaming you.
Right.
Do you understand it though?
Yeah.
And
I think blame is bad.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, do you understand it though? Okay, now let's work from that standpoint and make something truly
And you mentioned
collaborative.
groups like 5-Star Bank that have
River City
Bank that have jumped in, right?
Yeah,
that,
literally.
That are, you know, I don't think they did it to lose money, so they're still accomplishing their mission, but they understand these things. So somebody listening to this and listening to all the things that you have said and all the things that you are doing, if they're inspired to go, you know, I want to help.
Yeah.
Like, how would they help your organization or organizations similar to yours accomplish these things? Because you just mentioned two families, one that's on their way to home ownership and another one that's already now owns a house. And both, I think you said, had no belief before that they could even do that.
Yeah.
And think of how many things it will change just by owning a home. Their wealth, their ability to support their families, and just the way they look at themselves and their neighborhood. So,
and on the business
I think those
side,
sort of
too.
things are really important to communities, and maybe they're not as easy to pinpoint as, I gave $5 million to this project, and so I can write it on a flyer or whatever. So, is there websites? Is it like, how, if somebody's listening to this, they're inspired and they're like, I want to help. I have the ability to help. I want to help. How would they go about that?
I think the easiest way would be to connect on the website, CLTRE.org, CLTRE.org. I think that's the easiest way to connect, directly with culture, right? And kind of get in. We're always seeking folks for our advisory board. We're always open to donations, like things like that. But I also, like, for me, it's, again, not from a selfish standpoint. It's like, go join the neighborhood association, whether you own or not. Angela, the one I was telling you about, already joined the neighborhood association in the place that she wants to own.
Oh, okay. That's looking forward for sure. Yeah.
Literally, right? And it's like, So join the neighborhood associations. If you're really about local development, support local. Support these local businesses in your neighborhood. Doesn't take much for you to go and pick up a coffee from one of the local people, pick up a gift from one of the shops in the neighborhood. Like, those things matter more than I think we think. I just learned the definition of power. Do you know where power, the definition of it is?
I'm curious to see what you say. So no.
So it comes from a Greek root, so I'm not going to butcher it, but it means to act. Like, that's what power is to act. And so when you think about it and you break it down like that, you have a lot more power than you think you do when you just act, when you just go and buy a gift from a local person, from a local store. You literally are supporting local, or go to that community cleanup. These things already exist. I think it's just opening your eyes to what is already there and tuning into that stuff in the community development space. So that's what I would say. It's not as hard as we think it is. It's just more intentional, and being more intentional with the way that our neighborhoods develop.
Great. Well, I just want to say thank you, not only for your time today, which I'm very grateful for, but more importantly for your time every day that you give to this city that I love, that I've lived in my whole life, but being an example of what can be done to lift others up, because in this day and age, there's a lot of division, and all I've heard you talk about is collaboration today. And I think I 100% agree that that's where we need to be. I have never seen division in any part of time in history works. It's collaboration. So I just want to say thank you to you for your heart and for what you do in our community every day, lifting others up. I think that's very noble, and I love to see it. And I can't have to say I love to see it in Oak Park, a community that's very near and dear to me. So I want to end by giving you the last word on what would you like to leave people with that that you think will help us find a way forward to a better tomorrow?
I'll just say I appreciate you for having this space and holding this space.
Thank you.
It's very important, right? Because the more people that are tuned into this frequency, the better things become, right? And so really just sitting in that gratitude space, I don't got all the answers.
I don't think any one person has all the answers,
That's why I'm hoping
right?
whoever's listening gets a bright idea and comes to the table. And I think that's
Call
what,
you.
literally, that's what makes all of this stuff go. So
Awesome.
That's what I'll say.
I appreciate you. Thank you. Roshaun Davis.
You. Yeah.